Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth, presented by Associates for Biblical Research, where we explore the historicity and the accuracy of the Bible. My name is Henry Smith. I'm here today for part 2 of our episode on the Mount Ebal Curse Tablet with Scott Lancer, my co-host, friend, colleague, and Dr. Scott Stripling, archaeologist and also friend and mentor. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank
to
you.
part 2 on Mount Ebal. Okay, so Scott, we mentioned wet sifting to our audience before, and some of our veterans who have heard us talk about it, we've talked about it over and over, but you know, it's good to, when we educate, when we learn about these things, to repeat ourselves in a very positive way to continue to educate about wet sifting. And it's so exciting and important. So let's start there with wet sifting at Shiloh, and then we'll make the bridge over to our key discovery.
Okay, so what we do when we wet sift at Shiloh, we excavate in the square, then we dry sift the material and pulling out anything of archaeological value, because we know exactly where it came from. We tag each pail as it comes out of the square, and then we dump that matrix down a funnel that goes into a mesh bag that is then labeled with a locus and pail number, which corresponds to the place in the square. It's then taken down to our washing station where volunteers wash that material. Anything of archaeological value goes back into that same bag with that tag and back to that supervisor. So then he or she can add it back to the material. So the things that would have been thrown away after only dry sifting, and listen, a lot of digs don't even dry sift things, or they very selectively dry sift. And so this is why we knew from our experimentation that these dump piles are full of archaeological material. I mean, in our own instance, for every one scarab we used to find, we now started finding 5. Yeah. So we knew we'd been throwing away, all archaeologists have been throwing away a lot of evidence in the past. So it's a very sophisticated operation at Shiloh. At Mount Ebal, it was a very primitive system because it was a provisional thing that we set up, but it was very functional for what needed to occur. When you wash that matrix and the dirt comes off of that, a bulla, a volunteer in a square has almost no chance to spot a bulla. I mean, it's made of clay, it's small, and it's covered with dirt, and they are seeing thousands of them every day. But in that washing process then, it pops, and now you can see beads and bulla and scarabs and coins and things like this.
Scott, tell us about what happened when the tablet was first found, when Frankie Snyder discovered it.
Right. Well, I mean, Frankie was a key part of our team, but let me just also give a shout out to the rest of the team. Abigail Levitt was my co-director. Michael Ludini was our photographer. Frankie was our small finds expert. Perry and his wife were there, Emmeline. Mickey Klauser was working with us, Suzanne Latimer, Greg Goldbranson, Jacob Figueroa, and
Gary Uri.
Gary Uri was with us, Jacob, Jordan McClinton, Dr. Kevin Larson. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out, but
if we forgot you, we love you still.
We still love you. Melody Bogle, our artist, is just a great group. Ellen Jackson, our metal detector. So just this great group of people sort of chosen for this project. It wasn't like a big team that we had put together. But our small finds expert was Frankie, who had worked for many years at the Temple Mount Sifting Project. And as Providence would have it, the tablet ended up in her tray. And so when she washes this material, and the wet, by the way, Steve Rudd designing the wet sifting station, Steve was with us as well. But when it's washed, Frankie sees this small, what she thought was a stone chip, now looks very different once it's been washed. And so she picks it up and she feels the weight. She knows that it's metal, she knows that it's lead, and she thinks to herself, could this be what I think it is? And so she calls me over, and I looked at it, and I thought my heart was going to jump out of my chest because I recognized what this was. And we looked at each other. Abigail came over. We all saw this sort of simultaneously. It's a defixio, D-E-F-I-X-O, a defixio, or a curse tablet. We know of hundreds of these throughout Israel. They're normally found in like caves, wells, anything that's in the underworld, you know, because it's a curse that they're trying to enact in the underworld. And most of them are very petty little things like, cursing someone who stole your boyfriend or something like that. And so they're like amulets. This is not an amulet, however, because it has an actual literary structure to it. So that was the day that we found it. It was providential that Frankie recognized it. We saw what it was. And I remember immediately cautioning them. We don't know that this is from that early period, because I knew those curse tablets from later time periods. I said, it's probably Greco-Roman. Someone came along and commemorated that it was Joshua's altar, the place of the curse, of course, on Mount Ebal, and left it there. But at the time I'm saying that, in my mind, I'm thinking, but wait a minute, we don't have any pottery from that time period. It's only late bronze and it's only iron one. So that was the day of discovery. And that picture that folks have seen of that tablet in the palm of my hand, I mean, that's immediately after the discovery.
Yeah, so based on your many years of experience and being an archaeologist, you know right away. The untrained eye doesn't know, and that's why you're saying in the sovereignty of God, the best person to have found it was Frankie, because she knew right away it was significant. Now, just to repeat what you're saying, if that hadn't been washed, and obviously it was already thrown away by Zertal, and they didn't see it, but even if it was dry sifted.
Right, because we missed it too.
Nobody caught it in the
Yeah.
dry sift. So this emphasizes, again, the importance of the wet sifting.
Yeah, just think about this. I mean, people are calling this, it's not my words, but many people are saying this is on a par with the Dead Sea Scrolls, this type of discovery.
Right,
the ramifications are massive. We'll get into that in a later segment. But to throw away something like that, to be that close to something that is going to change our paradigm, is just incredible. So the value of wet sifting is enormous. And I encourage all my colleagues to slow down, invest in this process. And we've helped some other digs start into the wet sifting process. More are doing it, but old habits are slow to change.
It's interesting too how, well, you said that about paradigms. We talk about paradigms. The paradigm of how you do archaeology is, in a way, you're challenging it. Not like to be obnoxious, but to say we can do a better job by wet sifting. So slow down, invest the money, get people to do this, because you're missing treasures.
And that was the goal of the project. As you guys know, we weren't looking for a curse tablet.
Right.
We wanted to just take a dump pile from Shiloh from the 80s, a dump pile from Mount Ebal, and wet sift those, and then publish an academic paper, a boring academic paper, that would say, we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them, because look what we're missing.
So you would have been saying, basically, here's all this cool stuff that we missed out on. Please invest in wet sifting, my fellow archaeologist friends.
Yeah,
fundamentally.
Yeah.
Right. And instead, we find the Mount Ebal Curse Tablet, which we're going to continue with in just a moment. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We'll be right back.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm your host, Henry Smith. I'm here with Dr. Scott Stripling and Scott Lancer. We're talking about the Mount Ebal Curse Tablet and its discovery in December of 2019. Now, if this kind of discovery intrigues you, we can't promise you if you come to Shiloh that you'll find something this significant, but we do invite you to come. You never know what you might find, so please consider joining us. Take a look at our website, digshiloh.org. Okay. Scott, you are up with the next question, sir.
Yes. Well, Scott, I want to ask you, obviously, a curse tablet, it's folded over. We need to try to find out if there's any writing on the inside. Maybe you could explain to us exactly how that happened and what we had to do to look inside.
It is about the size of 2 postage stamps, 2 by 2 centimeters. So if it were unfolded, it would be 4 by 2 centimeters. And we can see that there's some glyptic things on the outside, but at that point we really can't make anything of it. And so our assumption is that the text is on the inside, it has been sealed, because that's normally how these things are, and this is what sets it into force. The curse goes into force when the thing is sealed. Writing on lead is very typical of the Late Bronze Age. And many of us think that Job is the oldest book in the Bible, or Job along with Genesis. You have no reference to the law of Moses, so it's a very ancient book. And we read in Job 19:24, "Oh, that my words were written on a lead tablet with an iron pen." And it just goes to show you that that is a typical thing from that time period of bringing things into action. Did they have an alphabet with which to write? Well, we know that there was what we would call a proto-alphabetic script that many people have called Proto-Canaanite or Proto-Sinaitic. Up to this point, people have been very hesitant to call it Proto-Hebrew because of the pressure of how you date these biblical events. We have the tablet itself, and we took it to our lab in Jerusalem, and Orna Cohen was there with me. And we very, very carefully tried to apply just a tiny bit of pressure to see if it was malleable in any way. And one of the tiny corners broke off. And so we stopped. We didn't want to go any further than that. But we were able to then take that lead to Hebrew University and to have it tested by Professor Naama Yahlon Mak. And Professor Mak was able to give us the results back pretty quickly. The lead came from a mine in Greece at a place called Lavrion, mines that are well known from the Late Bronze Age. And they're used in other periods too, but so initially all we know is that, well, it's possible. So it's coming from a mine that was in use in the Late Bronze Age. However, we all know in archaeological ancient Near Eastern studies that exports from the Aegean to Israel stopped around the year 1200. We call it the collapse of the Late Bronze Age civilization. So it's suggesting early on, before we can even read the text, we're getting a suggestion that it may be a very early date.
So that's an example we've talked about many times on this program. It's not just one piece of evidence, although pottery is very critical. The relationship now between the lead and the knowledge we have about where it came from and the pottery. Right? So when you were joking that you were contradicting yourself, wait, lead tablets come from later periods, but you knew what the pottery said, wait, this could be before 1200. The analysis of the lead, scientific, independent, unbiased analysis. It's not you saying it.
Right.
It's an expert saying it. Comment on that a little bit, because sometimes we're accused of trying to prove the Bible.
Sure. Well, we bring in a very interdisciplinary team. We're bringing in scientists who are doing metallurgical studies, and we've got all sorts of ceramic analysis and neutron activation analysis and carbon dating. And I have a number of Israelis on our teams. In fact, we cooperate with all 5 Israeli universities on various things. So having those specialists a part of this process is really important. So somebody's not out there able to say, well, that's just Stripling, he's trying to prove the Bible or something like that. Not to say people didn't say that, because I heard one skeptic early on said, well, it's got to be from a later time period. Must be. We only have pottery from the Late Bronze Age and the Iron Age 1, so there's 2 choices to go from, unless you're saying that just this person individually came in the Roman period and left this defixio, which of course later we found out was not a possibility. The intriguing thing is what we did with it. So we leave Israel, the tablet is in storage, and assuming we're going to be back in just a few months, and then the world turned upside down in March 2020 with the worldwide health crisis, and we are unable to get back into Israel. And in the meantime, we do locate, with the help of my friend Zvi Konisberg, and I should mention also Aaron Lipkin, who was critical in the early phases of working with the dump and getting the material out. A number of Israelis that partnered with us. But Zvi helped me then courier the tablet to Prague and to have it scanned in a lab there that had expertise in tomographic scanning. And lo and behold, we were able to see what was on the inside.
Excellent. So you've mentioned this before, but had Dr. Zertal found this before, it would have been impossible for them to analyze it because the technology didn't exist.
Well, that's right. I mean, in the 1980s, what would they have done with it?
Yeah.
There was no way to do this. You think about when Barkai found the silver scroll at Ketef Enom, silver scrolls at Ketef Enom. Silver, they had the priestly blessing on them. It's the oldest portion of Scripture that we have that has survived from the ancient world, and really the only blessing. Everything else is a curse. That was different. It was more malleable. They were able to get it open. The copper scroll, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, they actually cut it in sections to open it up to read it.
Right.
That was not an option for this. So the technology did not exist until now to be able to do this.
When we say so tomographic scans, I was trying to explain this to my daughter, so I said they used supercomputer scanning. I mean, that's fundamentally. So just describe, we got about 45 seconds in this segment, just sort of like what that scanning does. You use the word slices. Just explain that a little bit.
All right, so they're taking it through thousands of scans, and each one is going microscopically deeper and taking slices or cuts as they're going down, and then we can see each one has a alphanumeric signature, so that we can study this slice and this slice and this slice until we can begin to know that we are seeing letters emerge, and that's the sweet spot that you want to be. And then we begin to actually see the first letters emerge. And the first letter that I saw one early morning when I woke up and turned on my computer and got this scan was an ox head that was morphing into a Hebrew aleph. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is that Proto-Sinaitic text. This is proto-alphabetic text. This is late Bronze Age. And I thought to myself, what if the next letter is a resh?
Okay, well, you're going to find out in our next segment the significance of that because Dr. Stripling is going to explain it to us, and we'll be right back after this break.
Bible in Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible in Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm your host, Henry Smith. I'm here with archaeologist Dr. Scott Stripling, the president of ABR, Scott Lancer, and we are here talking about the Mount Ebal Curse Tablet. Okay, so we left off the last segment talking about, you mentioned an Aleph ox head, and most people are probably going, okay, what are you talking about? You're going to lose me now. So Scott has the next question for you, sir.
Yeah, Scott, I think when people hear you talk about the script, there's a lot of questions about that. Maybe you could describe that. Are there parallels of the script that we find on this defixio? Maybe we should define defixio too while we're at it.
Sure. Well, a defixio is just a curse tablet, very simply. Yes, so the script is known. The mines at Sedabet El Halim in the Sinai, other places, even in Israel recently, we have examples of this script that has been found. The challenge is, how do we prove that this is Canaanite or that it's Israelite? Because they're using the same alphabet, pretty much. Like, I have Muslim neighbors and Buddhist neighbors. We're writing with the same English script, so to speak, or font. So the only way to be able to know that for certain, sometimes archaeological context will help, but beyond that, do we have words that are uniquely Hebrew words? Religious words, for example, that only exist in the Israelite cultic system, or uniquely Canaanite words. And so up to this point, we haven't been able to say with certainty that this was a Hebrew script, but on our inscription, as we'll get to in just a moment, we do have very unique Hebrew words.
All right, so you mentioned in the last segment that you started to see the Aleph and the Resh, which would be the equivalent of the A, first letter in the alphabet, R sound in Hebrew, just like in English. So elaborate on that, because what I'm sure you came out of your chair, what was it, at 4:30 in the morning or something crazy like that as you began to see this?
It was super early. You have all these Middle Egyptian hieroglyphic symbols, hundreds of them, 600-700 of these. And what happens is those symbols begin to morph into phonetic alphabet. And so you go from 700 symbols to 22 letters that are phonetic. Now you can write, in a much more practical sense. So when I saw this Aleph, I remembered I'd had a conversation with Boyd Sievers, a professor at University of Northwestern, who's part of our dig team. And I remember we were talking about this, and he goes, don't forget, arur is the Hebrew word for curse. So if you get an Aleph, be aware of that. And then so I see this ox head, and I know this is an Aleph. And then we see a resh, and I think, oh my goodness, we've got the word curse on this tablet, and the script is a late Bronze Age script, which is from the time of Joshua. This is too good to be true. And then the word is repeated in the inscription. Arur appears several times. So the whole text then begins to open up before us, and within a few days we have the basic decipherment. And working with me, of course, on the collaborative team, I should mention are Pieter van der Veen, Johannes Gutenberg-Universität in Mainz, Germany, renowned epigrapher, Gershon Galil from University of Haifa, and then Daniel Wawrik and my other Prague colleagues doing the scientific work and aspect of it. So we're all crunching this together, and Gershon gets some of the first readings that are coming out, and within a few days we have the basic reading of it.
Remarkable, remarkable. Okay, so let's do, before we we don't want to tease the audience too much because we're in our third segment here. So we're going to, but I want to, there's something I want to cover though. The prevailing theory about the development of the alphabet is that it came out of Egypt, sort of from Egyptian hieroglyphic as a sort of arc into Canaanite or proto-Canaanite. That's the prevailing secular theory. It seems like it has a lot of merit to it.
Yes.
So we're coming along and saying, you got it right, but there could be some players in here that you don't know about. So this is one of those paradigm issues. Talk about that a little bit, because it's interesting how that matches the audience already hearing me thinking, out of Egypt to Canaan, what is that? So go ahead and talk about that.
Right. When I was doing undergraduate studies, though, Henry, we were still talking about the alphabets coming from Mesopotamia.
Oh, is that right?
And so it's only in more recent decades that the prevailing paradigm has come about. And who's coming from Egypt to Canaan? You have a bridge here, and these are the Hebrews. So they have a unique language, a distinctive language, and Moses, of course, is trained in all the literature and learning of the Egyptians. So he knows Middle Egyptian, and he knows Hebrew. And so he becomes this perfect bridge, I believe, that is able to take this burgeoning new language and to take the revelation that God is going to give him and to be able to write that down. Writing it in Middle Egyptian would have taken a whole library, but with a phonetic alphabet, he's now able to write it very succinctly.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we're going to give the audience you're going to give them the translation of it here, and then we're going to build on it in the next episode. So go for it, Scott. Tell, what does it say?
Well, we got 48 letters, and we never dreamed that we would get that many letters. And they're tiny letters, and they're on the inside, and some of them overlap with each other. And in this early time period, I have to caution, this script can be read vertically or horizontally, right to left or left to right. So there can be different readings of it, but in grappling with it, our collaborative team, the reading that we came up with is something like this: cursed, 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 cursed are you by the God Yahweh.
Yahweh.
Cursed you will surely die, cursed by Yahweh, cursed, cursed, cursed. Real encouraging inscription. I think it's a summary of the curses of Deuteronomy.
Yes.
And it's a titular sort of a document written by one individual on behalf of the nation, and it has a literary form to it. It's a chiasm, so it's a parallel structure to it, sort of an inverted literary sense like people would get when they read the Psalms. So when we saw this, we were just in shock that this appears to be something that is ceremonial, it's titular, it's on behalf of the nation, and it corresponds beautifully with what we read in Deuteronomy.
Well, amen to that. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for episode 2 here on the Mount Ebal Curse Tablet. You've just heard Dr. Stripling sort of tell you about what is on it. We're going to continue to talk about that. We're going to talk about the implications for the reliability of Scripture, the date of the writing of Scripture, and more about this script. It's very important, so we're thankful that you've joined us for Digging for Truth, and we hope you'll come back for episode 3. See you again soon.